Today is the big tune-up video on this 1974 Porsche 912. This engine already has about 50 miles on it. The initial break-in is what I call done, but it needs a tune-up, and actually it's going to be more than that. It's a complete setup of the engine. There's a few things I need to fix, plus I'm going to break out some special tools and share with you some kind of unconventional tips on tune-up. So please stay tuned.
Garage time.
Most of the work we're going to be doing on the engine today is going to be from the top side, but I do want to adjust the valves, and I thought it would be a little easier just to lift up the back of the car, especially for the camera. The first 50 miles of any brand new engine can always be difficult, and a lot can change in those 50 miles. I've already pulled the break-in oil out after like the 40-mile mark, and I took apart the oil filter. Remember, this car has a full flow oil filter, and this media came out of it. It's the Mobil 1. It doesn't look bad. There was some stuff floating in the bottom, and it really wasn't metallic. Remember, this engine was not really carefully preserved during its rebuild. It had been moved around many times. The engine's perfectly cold right now. I'm going to do the valve adjustment. 50 miles doesn't seem like I can get too far out of whack, but as things are seating, this is a fresh valve job on here. We just want to make sure the clearance is correct. And when I set up the engine originally, I put it at 0.08 of an inch. Today we'll move it down to 6 thousandths. Adjusting the valves is a pretty straightforward process, pretty well documented. You basically just want to make sure the engine is at top dead center for cylinder number 1. And it's easiest to start with 1 because there's markings on the crank pulley and the distributor to know that it's going to cylinder 1. Now this is a non-stock distributor, so I'm just going to double check the wiring too. I know that cylinder number 1 is this far one over here. You're going to rotate the engine until this rotor points to that wire. That's when it's going to fire number 1. Okay, now I'm getting close to number 1. That was right about here, and now I can see the marks on the pulley. So it's pointing to number 1, and I'm getting, this is the original mark on the pulley, and now that's right there at top dead center. You always need to get a little bit of oil coming out, and that is this one right here. Between the top of the valve stem and the rocker arm. And that feels like the exact right amount of drag. And this one feels loose. Just like that. And I'm going to turn it like 20 degrees. And now it has a nice amount of drag on it. You know, like in this case, it won't prevent it from rotating, but it's not going to slip out. So that's the amount of drag that I like. Okay, remains the same. So this time I'm going backwards. And backwards again until that timing mark comes straight up. Go ahead and loosen this guy right away because I know it's very loose. Okay, just got some gas. I'm gonna do some warm up and make sure this thing is warmed up so we can get it all tuned up. hesitation right there is one of the things I'm trying to fix. Just off idle, it's got a lot of hesitation, so I'm going to try to fix that. It's very boggy right there. Right about 1500 RPM, it's really boggy. Up, it seems okay. Okay, this is second gear, real light throttle, hesitate, 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 and then right at 2000 RPM, it starts to go. So it's between 1000 and 2000. We have something wrong with the idle circuit or something wrong with the synchronization. The engine's fully warmed up now. I'm just letting it idle here for a while too. I'm gonna go get my timing light and we'll check the timing now that the engine's fully warm. Took me about 3 times to get the dwell right at 50. First I moved it the wrong way. It went really low, like 25. And I finally got it to 50. That does probably change the timing, so I'm gonna put the timing light on it. Check it at full advance. I'm looking for like 33, 34 full timing. And this distributor is new, so I'm not going to put any lube or anything on it. I'll do that on the next tune-up. And now I'm going to put some new plugs in. These are the NGK BP6HS. And I'm going to replace the plugs that are in there. The plugs that are in there are old plugs from a previous engine. I didn't, because of the break-in process, I didn't want to put the new plugs in. I ran a little bit of 2-stroke oil on the first couple gallons through this engine. So I didn't want to foul the plugs. So now it's time to put these in. That should take care of the ignition system. Now before I put these in, I'm going to do another leak down test on the engine. That's going to rule out any mechanical issues with the engine. We've already adjusted the valves. We're going to check the leak down or compression, and then we'll be ready to move on to the last thing, which is the carburetors. So this is set to 80 PSI, this is the input, and here's the leak. It's also 80, so the leak down is essentially 0. And this one has, there's 70, so this one has a 2% leak down. It's still really good. Same, 80 and 80. Also pretty black. Also 80 and 80, or 80 and like 79. Here's the new plug versus the old plug, and they don't extend, or they're about the same height, in other words. So it's always good to make sure it's not going to hit anything inside the engine. And then the gap on this is supposed to be 0.24, and so I have this gauge. And sure enough, I can get this. This is 0.25, and it fits just perfect. So these are pretty much gapped from the factory, but it's always good to check. Put a little bit of anti-seize on there, not much. Install it. Also, don't forget to take this little barrel off the end, or you'll never get the spark plug wires. I removed that, and then I like to use this rubber fuel hose just to get the threads started. This holds the plug. I can spin it with the hose so I don't get it cross-threaded in the head. The engine's back on again. I've got the new plugs in. Last thing I'm gonna do with the ignition system is just pull one plug at a time, one wire at a time, and see how that drops the RPM. It should drop everything really evenly, but I'm gonna check that real quick, and then we'll move on. These wires are already loose. It's a noticeable drop. Again, noticeable drop. Noticeable drop. So the drop is even amongst all 4 cylinders, so that's another really good sign. The only remaining thing to do with the ignition system would be to replace the spark plug wires. I really don't know how old the wires are, but I ran the engine at night with all the lights out, and I didn't see any major leakage. I didn't see any arcing across the wires, and I'm not having any misfire problems, so I don't think changing wires are gonna do me any good. I'm gonna run these as long as possible. I think they're okay. Yeah, I want to get into the carburetors, but one thing I noticed is that hesitation is likely due to the carbs being out of sync. And one of the big problems with my car is that the throttle bar is completely worn out. So you can wiggle the throttle shaft on the driver's side. You can wiggle it up and down like 1/8 of an inch. It's completely worn out. So before I can do a lot of synchronization, I need to get that crossbar fixed. I've removed this crossbar from my fan shroud to inspect it and figure out what to do. It's in really poor shape. This side is completely bent. I don't know if you can tell, but that's supposed to be kind of 90 degrees. You know, this side is closer, but they're sort of bent in. Then they're all twisted up. There's plier marks on it. The real telltale sign this one's trashed is the ball has worn a big divot inside this tubing. So it's really worn. That's why there was so much play up and down. So I think what I'm going to have to do, there's no way I can rebush or recreate that. So I think this piece is end of its useful life. However, this side is in much better condition. And that makes sense because all the forces are really concentrated on one side because this is where the throttle linkage from the fan shroud comes from. So I think what I'm going to do, I have an extra one of these, or I have 2 more at least. So I'm going to cut the end of this one off and weld that onto another side on this one, if I can't find one that's already, you know, not worn out. So I'm gonna go look at my parts stash. And I'm back with 3 more of these things, and I've cleaned the ends with some, I just sprayed carburetor cleaner down there with a Q-tip to get all the old grease out of there. All 3 of these have the exact same problem. So it's not like I can just bolt a new one on. All of these have the same issue. This tapered shim is really helpful. These are like door shims from Home Depot, and it's tapered, so it allows me to adjust the height. Works really well. But we need to put the ground. There we go. It works really well. Okay, the downside to having a restoration that's a driver is normally I would take this and have it plated, zinc plate with a yellow chromate and make it look as good as new. But because I want to drive this car, I just sprayed it with a little bit of metallic chrome out of a spray can. I guess that's going to protect it from rusting. I mean, who knows if this will ever get replated, but it should. And the other thing that some of you might have noticed, that the angles on this are wrong because there's basically like two rights and you need a right and a left. So I'm just going to use some of the other ones that were good and get some pliers and just bend it into the right shape so I have a left and a right. The length is perfect. That position's perfect. We just need to bend it that way. Now before I put it on, I'm going to check the balls for wear. If I need to replace a few of them, I guess I could, but let's see if those wear at all. I suspect those are harder steel. 310, 312. And then just for fun, the one that I cut off, I don't know if it's worth changing a ball for just 0.02, but they do wear, something you might want to measure. Okay, this is now in the car and it's spinning really nice and smooth. I cannot push up and down like I did before with any play. This side is the same, wasn't a problem in the past, but this bracket here is a flex bracket. So if I pull really hard on the arm, I can make it flex. Actually, I push on the arm, I can make it flex. And what that's doing is it's putting pressure on those balls at all times. So there's no play in the linkage. And right now, there is really no play at all. It's going to be much better. So the last thing to adjust is the carburetors. And this is where things can get a little out of control and there's so many adjustments to do. And I'm having that problem with that off-idle stumble. So I'm thinking it's probably the synchronization or it could be a mismatch in the jets. So I've already gone through and written down all my settings. This was when I first put the carburetors on. I've already moved a few things just to make the car drive better to and from the gas station. One of the big concerns here is the idle stop was 3 turns out. Normally you want the throttle plates closed so that the progression circuits can work. I have a feeling that the timing of those progression ports maybe not be right. The air bypass on these Webers was all the way closed. And idle jet 50, the Venturis were 32. This came from a totally different engine, these carburetors. So most people recommend on a stock 912 engine, which this is, it has the big bore pistons, but the cam is stock. So I think the 28 is what the Webers come with. I've already swapped out the 28 millimeter Venturis. The 32s will work. It's just a preference, you know, do you want high RPM performance or do you want better drivability around on the street? And because this is mostly a non-high performance engine, basically I just want to be able to drive around the street, but I'm still having that low speed drivability issue. And then the main jets are 125. They're currently in there right now, 125s. And to set the idle mixtures, I am going to use something called the Color Tune. This is like a spark plug that allows you to look inside. It's like got a window in it, so you can look inside and see the combustion. And you can see the color of the combustion. If it's the ideal mixture, it'll be like a light blue. So you can watch the color and sort of determine if it's rich or lean. So I'm going to do that for each of the barrels and make sure we can get it dialed in as good as possible. You don't need tools like this, but it just gives you just a little bit more precision than the idle speed drop. You can also kind of measure the idle speed drop, but I'm going to try this out. Hopefully it's not too much work. Yeah, the color tune actually works pretty well. You're able to, I think, dial the mixture to within like a half a turn, maybe a quarter of a turn. You can start to see the color change, and you will hear the engine RPM increase or decrease. And that's the other method, is just go with the highest idle. And that does correspond with the bluish color. So if it's rich, it goes very orange. If it's too lean, it'll go very white, or it'll actually not spark at all. It'll just not run well, and the RPMs will drop. So I think it's a cool tool. It is difficult to use because you got to pull it out and you take the plug out, put the color tune in. The difficult thing, I mean, getting this in where the spark plug goes is actually no different than a spark plug. It's pretty easy to get that in. The challenging part is there's this extender. This is a high tension lead extender. So you thread this on the end of the color tune, like so, and then you put the spark plug boot on the end, and that allows you, to see line of sight into this glass window. That's how it works. The difficult thing though is trying to get this, I mean, this is like an M3 thread or something, trying to put this in the black hole, blind hole, and get these two to line up and thread together is actually a big hassle. I mean, you have to use the mirror just to see what you're doing, or you have to go by feel. So if I was to do this again, I would make a very deep socket, probably a deep socket all the way out to the end, and then be able to thread it out here with a wrench or something. I'm now going to move on to synchronizing off idle, and then take it for a test drive. Okay, that's good. Forgot my camera on that one, but the drive was good. It's driving a lot better. Idle is really great, solid idle. The transition is much improved. It still has a little, I wouldn't even call it a hesitation. It's basically like a little bit of a bog. And so now I'm thinking it has to do with the main jets. I think the difference between the idle jet, which is now a 55, to the main jet is a 125. I think I want to bring the main jet down a little bit to about 120. And because I don't want to hurt the engine, I'm going to install the air-fuel ratio, the wideband O2 sensor. You got to put that in the exhaust. It measures basically the oxygen in the exhaust, and it tells you your air-fuel ratio. If you saw that video with Ian, he had the same gauge, and so I'm going to put that gauge in. That's going to help me diagnose the main jet. You can't really use the color tune when you're driving, and it's not really accurate on that. It's not really designed for that. It's only designed for idle. So that's going to be the next method, but I'm going to switch the jets out, put the AEM gauge in, and then try again. Couple start and stops you can see in the weld, but generally that's going to be just good enough. I mean, obviously look at how dirty and ugly this thing is. It's had a chance to warm up a little bit. It's running a lot better with the smaller idle jet or smaller main jet. The 115's really made an improvement on the transition. Much smoother. Still pretty rich. We'll do a full throttle up here in just a second. Almost out of daylight. Much smoother. So now at 1500 it just goes. It's running so much better. That transition between the idle circuit and the main circuit is really smoothed out. It's much, much better. I think the synchronization had a little bit to do with it, but also that jet change going down from 125 to 120 really kind of livened it up and helped that transition a lot. So I think it's still running a little too rich according to the gauge. It feels good, but you know, you don't want to let it run rich like that forever. So I want to continue to do a little more tweaks. I don't think I have 115 mains. That's the next size down. I do have a 50 idle jet though, so I will probably try putting the 50 idle jet in so that the disparity between the idle circuit and the main circuit will be a little bit less. It just makes that transition a little bit easier. I had more planned too in terms of synchronization. So I made these are velocity stacks, real similar to the ones that are on the Webers now. But these are instrumented with, you can see here, there's this thin tube on here, and that has a tiny hole. If you look down the center of there, there's a tiny hole in that tube. And so what this does is this will replace the velocity stacks, and I'm gonna run tubing inside my car to a gauge, and I have a pressure gauge, and if I put one on cylinders or bank 1, 2 and the other on bank 3, 4, and I'm driving the car, I should be able to see which bank is flowing more airflow, and that should help me synchronize the carburetors a little bit better. I did have Alex help me, but it's super difficult to hold the pedal at like a low RPM without the engine just going over like 3,500 or something like that. And this, I think, will allow me to test the synchronization while I'm driving. Something I've never tried before, but I had planned on doing it on this video. I just don't have any more daylight left to try it out. The gauge looks like this. This is the gauge I was going to use. This is a digital differential manometer, and it's pretty accurate. I think there should be enough signal, at least at high airflows. Super happy with the engine so far. Clearly the rings are breaking in because the leak down numbers are really good. I had a worst case 2% leak down on that side, and everything else was basically zero, unmeasurable, or like half. So really happy with the engine. Please give this video a like if you want to see more. I will do part 2 with more of these synchrometer tools and also some hot wire anemometers. If you're not familiar with those, it'll be really fun next video. See if we can get this thing running even better. Thanks, take care.